You are an engineering student or you are doing architecture in university or college and you want to buy a good laptop for your course. You don't know what to look for. You don't know anything about laptops. You don't know anything about computers. You don't know about specs. You don't know anything. Then this video is for you. This series has been specially dedicated to you to help you figure out which is the best laptop for my course, that is engineering or architecture. By the end of this series, you'll have figured out which laptop is best for my course and at which price you are going to get that laptop. Now, we will be working with a budget of 30,000 to 45,000 Kenyan shillings. Okay, this is to help you make you an informed decision before buying that laptop, because an engineering laptop is costly compared to the tech students that we did for the previous episode or even the series, and the regular students. For yours it is critical, and for you, you are going to take as much time as possible to explain what are the important specs that you are supposed to look for and the rationale between getting the right specs and balancing it with the right budget. Okay, we'll talk about all this in the next episodes. Before you buy a laptop, there's one thing that laptop shops or attendants never tell you. And if you miss it, you will either overpay or buy a laptop that struggles the moment school gets serious. Now stay with me. By the end of this episode, you will know exactly what it is. And I want you to think of it as a compass, not as a brand, not as price tag. Now this is the compass that points you to the right laptop at the right price. Na kama wewe ni engineering ama unafanya architecture in university or college, tukue tu honest kidogo. What are you actually using your laptop for? In this episode, nitakusaidia kujua ni nini utafanya nayo. That is for the STAID students, engineering and architecture students, okay? Kitu ya kwanza utakuwa ukifanya na hiyo lapi ni reading documents, you are writing notes, PDFs, research, that is basically light work. The second thing that you can be doing with you will be doing with the laptop is typesetting assignments and reports. Like umepewa kazi na lek, unafaa kuifanya na lapi, kutypeset, kuformat everything, you will use the same laptop. Thirdly, there's a bit of coding and programming here and there, although sio heavy compared to akina computer science and IT students. And fourthly, this is the most important thing. This is where things start to change. Utakuwa ukifanya 3D modeling and rendering, okay? Especially for the mechanical and civil engineering, and now the architecture students, okay? These 3D tasks are the heaviest tasks that you'll ever throw at your laptop. You'll be using softwares kama kina AutoCAD, there's Creo, there's Siemens, NX, na sasa kuna Fusion 360 amongst other softwares that are used for 3D rendering and detailing. If your laptop can handle this, everything else become easy. And focus yetu ni the heaviest among all these tasks that I've mentioned. Okay, apart from the tasks that we'll be giving to that laptop, ziko based na shule, there are other tasks that you'll be giving that laptop, especially if you want to add extra skills to learn as a student, so that before you graduate, hizo skills zitaanza kukulipa. Na skills zenye tutakurekomendia are based on your courses or your abilities as a student and the laptop that you have. Alright? But we'll talk about that later in the series, so make sure that you follow us and stay till the end of the series. And just like that, tumetengeneza compass yetu. In the next episode, I'll show you how to translate this compass into the exact laptop specs you should care about. After creating the compass that we'll be using to select the right laptop for engineering students and architecture students, then what? This is where I introduce you to translating those needs, basically the tasks that we have defined in the previous episode, to now the hardware components that we'll focus on. This episode will be quite short because we'll be taking time to analyze each components individually in the next coming episodes. Before I even talk about the components, you need to understand a computer or a laptop is basically an integration of several hardware components that work together to enable you to do something on that laptop. Having that in mind, we need to focus on these key hardware components. This number one, the processor is important to us for our tasks. Now, number two component that we taangalia inaitwa GPU. This is the graphical processing unit, what you call the GPU. Okay, there's a third thing that is called the storage. Okay, we look at that individually. And now the RAM is the last component that we look at. And finally, we look at the screen. Okay, as we'll be talking about the components, we'll be setting up a benchmark where, as a student, if you are doing engineering and you'll be doing the 3D tasks, there is a level that you can't go below. Okay, basically we'll be looking at the specs. Let's meet in the next episode as we analyze the processor that we are going for as engineering students or as a student who is doing architecture. You could be planning to buy a laptop with the best RAM, a great GPU, and even fast storage, but your laptop will be sluggish. Why? Because hujafanya research yako ya CPU that is best suited for heavy tasks. And if you choose the wrong CPU, it will cause the bottleneck, which is dangerous for engineering and architecture 3D modeling tasks. And as an engineering student or architecture, you need to make sure that the laptop can handle these tasks without struggling. Okay, and for your degree, you need a minimum of Intel Core i5H or i7H or i9H if you have the budget. Anything below that, laptop yako will be sluggish. CPU ni nini, you might ask, or in other words, we call it the processor. The CPU is a component on the laptop. CPU ni nini? I want you to think of the CPU as the brain of the laptop. It is responsible for handling everything. But what is the basic work of CPU? It basically reads the code behind softwares and executes them as commands. Okay, and that is where the other components such as the RAM, ROM, GPU come in. After reading the code, it delegates the tasks to the components that I've just mentioned. And what the CPU does, it interacts with the engineering or 3D softwares, opens them, and starts to calculate structural analysis and even the simulations and also the load testing. And the weaker the CPU, the longer it takes to think and even to perform the calculations. And in that case, I'll briefly describe how the Intel processors or CPUs are categorized according to how they handle tasks. Now, I'm sure you have heard of i3, i5, i7 and i9. But kitu hujui ni ati, for all the categories that I've just mentioned, they have 3 subcategories that are in it. For the i3, i5, i7 and i9, okay? There are those processors that zimetengenezwa ku handle the low duty tasks and they are defined by the letter Y. As for the moderate tasks, zinakuanga defined by the letter U. As for the heavy duty tasks, zinakuanga defined by H, okay? So for the i3 there is i3y, i3u and there is i3h. Okay, for the i5 there is i5y, i5u and i5h. Okay, for the i7 same case, i7y, i7u and i7h. Okay, and as engineering students we are interested in the high performing processors or CPUs, that is i5h, i7h, which is recommended, or i9 if you have the budget. Now where do you find that letter H or U or Y? Maybe you made a shop and you want to check whether it is an i5H or i7H. Now what you do, if your laptop ishaekwa operating system ka Windows 10 or Windows 11, then you're supposed to open the task manager and then you will see a tab called CPU. You're supposed to check it from there. I will attach the video showing you the processor name details, okay? And as I'm saying this, I am assuming that you are going to buy a refurbished laptop because 30,000, the budget that we defined at the start of this series, to 45,000, haiwezi kutafutia a new laptop. So you are going for second-hand or refurb laptops, okay? Because as for the new one, in the box you will see the name of the processor and that's where you're supposed to collect the information. But that gives you the rough idea of where you are supposed to find that information of the CPU. But in case your laptop haijaekwa na any operating system na iko kwa shop, kumbuka we are in the shop. I'm telling you this just before you go to the shop, okay? So you're supposed to press F2 if you're using HP For the other laptops, I'll list a website where you can check all those details. You're supposed to press F2 as lapi inawaka so that you can check the details and even the name of that processor. It should read the genuine laptop parts, and that includes the processor name or the CPU name. Okay, it should read something like i7, i5, then there's a number there and there's the letter U, Y or H, and our interest is H. Okay, I've told you now where you are supposed to find that letter. Now let's define what generation that you're supposed to get. At least get an 8th generation or 7th generation and above. Okay, because that laptop is built to handle the modern applications, and it will serve you longer than if you choose maybe a 3rd generation or 1st generation of the processor. Kumbuka, we are on the generation of the processor, not the laptop itself, the processor. Okay, kuangalia the generation of that CPU or processor, you need to first read the number just before the letter. Okay, there is maybe let's say it's 8500H. The number you're supposed to look at is the 8. If that number has not exceeded 9999, then you're supposed to look at the first number. If it has exceeded the 9999, you're supposed to look at the first 2 numbers. Let's say it's 14300H. You're supposed to now look at the 14, and that means it's the 14th generation. For the one that I've said 8500H, you know that the 8 means that it is generation 8. All right, now you know, and that's it. That's all the information that you need so that you can select the best laptop for your architecture or engineering course or tasks. Okay, I'll be lying to you if I tell you that 30,000 Kenyan shillings can get you a laptop with a good graphics card. That will be the greatest lie of the 21st century, because as an architecture student or engineering student, you can do better. But since tuko kwa budget 30,000 to 45,000, we'll try and get the entry level graphics card. So what type of graphics card are you supposed to look for in a laptop so that before you purchase it, you know exactly what you are going for? Now understand that we have a task that is defined in episode 2. Defined that the highest level of task that we are going to give our laptop is 3D rendering, right? So basically we want a graphics card that can handle 3D modeling and 3D rendering, and for that case look for a dedicated graphics card. Of course, I'll tell you why we are supposed to go for dedicated instead of integrated, and also ensure that that dedicated graphics card has a VRAM. Okay, that is the RAM that comes with the graphics card. That is okay, we'll talk about this as we go along. But before we go further, we need to define what a graphics card does and what it is. Okay, graphics card ni nini and nini nafanyaga. We first start from the basics. A graphics card is responsible for displaying the things that you see on your computer, so that you can see things on your computer. That is the graphics card that is responsible for that. Okay, in 3D modeling and this architecture and engineering tasks, it is responsible for calculating. It is doing the maths behind. Let's say you are modeling something, it does the mathematics, maybe x, y, maybe in a calculator to vitu mingi. Just know that. Okay, I don't want to go into details, but understand that it is responsible for displaying everything on your computer, and now the tasks that you have given to it, that is the 3D modeling. Okay, it calculates all that. And also you should remember that zinasaidianaga na CPU to do that maths so that you create something. Maybe you are using AutoCAD. So what the GPU does, it works hand in hand with the CPU to perform the calculations and even to render the images. Okay, and even to render the projects. Okay, now you have an understanding of what it does. Now let's understand the types of graphics card that exist. We have one that is integrated graphics card, that is yenye iko part of the CPU, and the second one is the dedicated GPU, where it is separate from the CPU. Okay, and as engineering or architecture students, we really are not interested in any way with the integrated one, and I'll tell you why in this video. And before we go further, let me just explain something that I ought to have explained in our previous episode, that is for the CPU. So we talked of the Y, U and H, but there is one category that I missed, and that is the G. There is another category of CPU called the G, G1 to G7. Okay, now there are CPUs that belong to that level. G1, instead of the H, they have G1 or G2 or G3, G4, G5, G6 or G7, whichever is on that laptop. Okay, and I'll briefly explain what that G means. So that G means that it has integrated graphics card, and I'm specifically talking about processors from Intel or CPUs from Intel. Okay, they have that G1 to G7. I hope umeelewa hiyo. There are two kinds of integrated graphics card. Ya kwanza ni ile yenye iko na basic graphics card that is integrated, and now the second one is the one that has the newer version of graphics card, and most of the time it includes graphics card called the Iris, Intel Iris, right? Now we go to the second category of graphics card. This is where the graphics card is standalone, iko peke yake, haiko part of the CPU. So anytime utaisikia dedicated graphics card, always you'll hear that it has a 1 GB graphics card, 2 GB, 3 GB, all the way to, I don't know, 16 GB, hivyo. But our interest is, we just want to ensure that the graphics card that we get, it has at least 1 GB VRAM, okay? Because our budget cannot allow us to get a 8 GB, dedicated graphics card. So we want to start from 1 GB. If you get a 2 GB, fine. If you get a 3 GB, fine, okay? And what does that GB mean? Because I might be confusing you. It's basically like a RAM. Ni kama graphics card ina run na RAM yake. Because now one thing you should know is that, let me put that into perspective. Anytime the CPU or the GPU is running or performing calculations, it needs to store cache files somewhere, and the RAM is usually the one place that it can get that storage. Okay, instead of the GPU or the CPU going to the RAM to keep resources there, why don't the GPU itself have its own RAM that is very close to it? Because I'll tell you one thing, there's a physical distance between the CPU or the GPU to the RAM, and that is going to cause latency, and that's a problem for our 3D and modeling tasks. So in that case, we need RAM that is readily available and close by, so that our laptop or computer can work very fast. Okay, and that's where the VRAM comes, and that is why you often hear GB, 2 GB graphics card, 3 GB graphics card when people are talking about graphics card. Okay, I now hope you have understood that concept. Okay, I'm not going to talk about the quality of the GPU that you're going to get, and if you hear GPU namaanisha graphics card, that is, I use those two terms interchangeably. Okay, up to there I hope that we are on the same page. There are 3 main manufacturers of graphics card. That is, the first is Nvidia, the second one is AMD, and the third one is Intel, which came into the market just recently. So if you want the best graphics card, go for Nvidia. Okay, however, if you still get an AMD graphics card, tu iko sawa, because in this series I'm not going to focus really on the quality. We are just looking for any laptop that has a graphics card, because our budget cannot allow us to get quality graphics card. We just, muelewe tu hivyo, you pay what you get, right? 30,000 cannot get you a good laptop with a good graphics card. But I'll comment on this. If you want to go for Nvidia graphics card, try as much as possible to go for the Quadro series or the Quadro type. Now let me briefly explain. Nvidia manufactures 2 kinds of graphics card. That is, the one for professional work and 2 is for gaming. Now let me come back to the professional category. There is Quadro and there is RTX Pro. Those graphics cards were primarily made for precision and accuracy. As for the gaming category, it was made for speed, because gaming requires speed, right? So the conclusion is that if you really want to get a good graphics card, try to go for the Quadro or for the RTX Pro. And since we are on a budget, just go for the Quadro entry series. Okay, we'll see about the laptops with this graphics card, but it won't be a sin if you still go for the RTX or GTX for the gaming. Okay, because they will equally do the work. Yeah, the 3D modeling and rendering. You should note that time sasa utaanza kuongezea workload. As I've said, I'm not into quality right now because our budget cannot allow us to choose quality. So whatever works. And since you have paired it with a good Intel processor, that will do the basic 3D rendering that we discussed in our previous episode. There's a deadly mistake that you can do while purchasing a laptop as a student, and that is the type of your laptop storage. That alone will greatly determine how responsive your laptop will be, how efficient your operating system will be running, or your apps will be responding as you are using them. And for our case at hand, getting a laptop with the SSD type of storage is non-negotiable, and not just any SSD. To avoid such a costly mistake, I need you to stay with me till the end to understand which storage you need and you are supposed to go for architecture students and engineering students. To you who doesn't understand what ROM is basically the storage of a computer or a laptop or a phone, right? This is where your operating system lives and also your files, including videos, documents. You want to store something, it is kept there. That is the function of ROM. Having an understanding of what the ROM or the storage device is responsible for, we need now to define the types of storage that exist. We have two types of storage. That is one that is HDD and we have SSD. HDD is one of the early types of storage and it is quite slow. And now we have the SSD, which is the modern version of storage, and it's very fast. There are several types of SSDs, that is SATA and there is NVMe. Okay, and for our architecture or engineering students, we really are not interested as much with the SATA because as compared to NVMe, it is slower. Anytime that you are using a laptop or computer, remember behind the scenes the operating system is running. Okay, and if you are running secondary applications such as Chrome for browsing or AutoCAD or any other software that you are using, the software is usually initialize or start from the ROM and then are loaded on the RAM. The RAM is an independent component which we'll be talking in our next episode, but we need to understand that our ROM needs to have very high speeds, so a very efficient type of storage which will be loading our apps and the operating system. So our target is NVMe rather than SATA. And as I am talking about this kind of storage, I'm talking about the primary storage. There are laptops that will have two kinds of storage, that is the primary and the secondary. Primary is where everything is loaded, apps, operating system and other important programs, right? As for the secondary option, you can be keeping your files there. The only point that we are interested in the HDD is when we are storing files but not loading the operating system. Okay, and now you have an understanding of what storage that you are supposed to go for. We have now talked about the quality. Let's now talk about the quantity. How many GBs, how much storage that you need. Ideally you can start with a 256. Kumbuka tuko kwa budget. We are on a budget for like 30,000 to 45,000 Kenyan shillings. The recommended quantity of storage that you can get is 512 GB. That's the recommended one. Okay, if you are starting out. You do need more, but you can start with the 256. Along the way, you will need to upgrade your type of storage. And considering that we are on a budget, I think that's a good option. Start with the 256. As you go along, you will upgrade. You'll buy a storage and you'll take it to the technician. He will install it for you. Now, and everything will be fine. There is nothing to worry about. Just because you have a 256 doesn't mean that you cannot expand it. You can actually expand it. You just need to buy that component and then you will install it later. Okay, but for now we are on a budget. You can start with a 256. I want you to imagine the RAM as the playground for your applications and also your operating system. Anytime your apps or operating systems inatoka store, which is the storage of your device, and in which we discussed in our previous episode, it is loaded onto the RAM. So anytime that you are doing anything, RAM sasa ndiko responsible for holding that information, right? That's the function of RAM. And for the case at hand, engineering and architecture students, the main tasks that we defined is 3D modeling and 3D rendering. In that case, you need a RAM that is responsible for holding heavy workloads and also at the same time for seamless speed. So what does that mean for us? We are going for DDR4 or DDR5. But kumbuka tuko kwa budget, it's 30k to 45,000 Kenyan shillings. That will not be able to afford us DDR5. So we are going for DDR4. I'll take you through a brief history of the RAM. There are several versions of RAM. That is now DDR1, DDR2, DDR3, DDR4 and DDR5, which is the latest. And hoping DDR6 will be dropping somewhere at the end of this year or next year. But our interest is any RAM that can be able to handle to store those random files very fast. And in that case, DDR4 is the most ideal for our case. As for the speed of that RAM, I cannot really tell because one, speed is usually determined by the CPU that you have chosen. That's why it is important to first of all consider the CPU that you are choosing first before you come to components of your PC or your laptop, right? Now, we have talked about the quality. What about the quantity? The most ideal quantity of RAM that you need as an engineering student or architecture is 16 gigs of RAM. And why do I say so? Remember, you have two chipsets at the laptop. That is the GPU and also the CPU. Let's assume that umenunua laptop ya maybe 1 GB dedicated graphics card. That is 1 GB. That GPU will need extra resources to compensate for what it is doing. At that point, it will require the RAM. The same RAM is being used by the CPU to do all those tasks. You now see why it is important to have 16 gigs of RAM instead of 8. It's because of that same reason. The CPU and the GPU are competing for the same resource, and that is very important to note. So the minimum that we want to go for our laptop is 16 gigs of RAM. If you get more than 16, that's good. In fact, you are better placed than someone who gets an 8. Now, something else that I need to mention, if you get a laptop that is expandable, like it offers an extra slot for extra RAM, I will recommend you to get that kind of machine, right? And that's it. RAM imeisha. Let's look at now the laptops with all these specs that we have defined from episode 4 to this episode ya RAM. If I was an engineering or architecture student, these are some of the laptops I will consider before buying. And of course, at a budget of 30,000 to 45,000 Kenyan shillings, it fits into my budget. At number 6, I have MacBook Pro 2017. That is the one with the Intel processor and a dedicated Radeon graphics. The problem with this laptop is that the RAM is DDR3. And as we defined in our previous episode, the RAM needs to be DDR4. Another problem with MacBooks is that the apps, the 3D rendering and modeling apps, are usually optimized for the Windows operating systems, not for MacBooks. So, whoever is trying to consider Apple or MacBooks for 3D rendering and modeling, you should remember that. That was number 7. Number 6, I have HP ZBooks 15G3. At number 5, I have Dell Precision 15 7520. At number 4, I have Dell Precision 3520. At number 2, I have Dell Inspiron 7501. And at number 1, which I think should be the best laptop at a budget when you are going for architecture or engineering, is Lenovo ThinkPad P53s. Of course, it might come at a price, probably 50,000 Kenyan shillings. But if you get it at 45, you're good to go. Now, for all these laptops that I've mentioned, they are not new. These are refurb or XUK, or in other cases, second hand, right? You should remember that you will not get a new laptop with that kind of budget, 30,000 to 45,000 Kenyan shillings. However, it will get you a laptop which can do the work, but in the future you will have to upgrade to another laptop. Remember that. As for the specs of each individual laptop that I've mentioned, you can check it out on the internet. Just search that name of that laptop, you'll check out the specs. If it ticks for you, or it comes close to the specs that I've defined from episode 4, you can consider before buying it, and that will greatly assist you in getting information beforehand, so that you have the right information before you go to the shop, right? Now, as an engineering or architecture student, you have quite a powerful machine, and besides the schoolwork, you can do something else with that laptop. How about if we discuss that in our next episode? Having a laptop as a college or university student should be treated as a privilege, the kind of privilege that needs to be exploited to enrich personal growth. From the laptops that we chose in our previous episode, these are quite powerful machines, and as an architecture student or engineering student, si kukaa na laptop tunde. Besides schoolwork, these are some of the skills that you can equip yourself with. Number 5, cryptocurrency and blockchain payment integrations. This is where you set up payment gateways using cryptocurrency. Now at number 4, we have motion graphics with Adobe After Effects. Adobe After Effects is a software which you can download and install in your machine to do that kind of work. Now at number 3, we have motion graphics with Blender, or you can even do 3D modeling with Blender. Blender is a software, you can decide to install it in your machine, right? At number 2, we have professional video editing with Adobe Premiere Pro, or there's another software called DaVinci Resolve, right? Both are video editing softwares that requires a graphics card. And considering that our laptop has one, it is best suited to equip yourself with that skill. And at number 1, we have graphics design with Adobe Photoshop. Adobe Photoshop is also another software, right? Be setting 30 minutes every day practicing one of these skills. Tena usifanye zote, just pick one and run with it. I can assure you, by the end of your school life, you will be way ahead of your peers in terms of specialized skills and knowledge, and one day you will be paid for solving someone else's problem with that skill. And who knows, that might end up to be your self-employed career. Now, this is a note. Of course, you are not limited to just the skills that I've just mentioned in this episode. You can check out other skills that I recommended in the 2 groups of students in our first and second series. As long as it aligns with your natural abilities and talents, please pursue that skill. And that's it. The series is almost coming to the end. Let's meet in the next episode as we summarize everything. We have come to the end of series 3, where we are talking about laptops with their specs that are best suited for engineering and architecture students. We broke down the key specs in depth, that is the CPU, GPU, RAM and storage. Now, besides students, you could be in a different profession planning to buy a laptop and you have no idea what to look for before acquiring one. And this is why we are here, to assist you in that journey and find you the ideal laptop for you. You can book a virtual consultation meeting with us. It could be that you want a MacBook or Microsoft or Razer Blade laptop or any other high-end laptop. You can talk to us. Or you might be having the need to buy the laptop but you don't have the time. Let us arrange for a meeting, figure out your needs, and we'll handle the specs, sourcing and even the delivery for you. The contacts are in our bio, or if you tap the link in our bio, it will take you to our website where you'll find our contacts. That's it. We'll meet in other videos where we'll be venturing into other topics about desktops, PCs, laptops, any personal computer or anything close to that.